All right, so affirmative action. Wait, can I get like a thumbs up from the people in the meeting that you can hear me, that you can see the screen? Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you, thank you. Okay, yes, so today in BLASK, we're going to be talking about affirmative action, specifically advancing equity and opportunity. Very fun stuff. Okay, so first, sorry, my Zoom is like, the computer's a little weird. Okay, all right, so here's what we're gonna be going over today. We're gonna be talking about what affirmative action is, this policy. We'll go over why it's important. Then we'll also talk about some of the myths and misconceptions surrounding affirmative action versus the actual benefits. Then we'll talk about the most recent action with affirmative action that SCOTUS has taken, which has been the overruling of affirmative action. We'll talk about their decision and the implications of them overruling it. And then we'll also talk about strategies dealing with the ban of affirmative action moving forward. So first, what is affirmative action? What is this policy about? Why is it important? So affirmative action is a series of policies and practices aimed at addressing historical and ongoing discrimination. It does so by promoting diversity, ensuring equal opportunities for people from underrepresented and disadvantaged groups in areas such as education, employment, and outreach programs, training programs, things like that. So basically kind of boosting people who have different circumstances that may have prevented them from getting to a certain place in their employment or in their education than the same kind of difficulties that other people may have faced, or the lack of those obstacles. So here is the history of affirmative action. It's quite a long history. It dates back to 1961. And this is even before the Civil Rights Act, when President J.F. Kennedy established the President's Committee on Equal Employment Opportunity. So this is the very first mention of the term affirmative action historically. And it's very specific in that it's only aimed at, sorry, someone joined the meeting. It's very specific in that it's aimed at federal contractors, and not necessarily applies to other contexts that we see affirmative action applying to today. Then President Lyndon B. Johnson kind of expands and reinforces this idea with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is the first time that employers and federal contractors, government contractors are told to enforce affirmative action. So by doing so, President Lyndon B. Johnson prohibits discrimination in employment on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Again, the only thing with this is that it's really only focused in areas of employment, training, vocational things. We don't really see it leave this specific area of advancement for a while. So next we have the history of affirmative action continued. There is an executive order, the executive order that JFK instituted, which was 10925. That's the previous one that we spoke about with that first usage of the term affirmative action. Lyndon B. Johnson again supersedes what JFK wanted by extending the scope of this executive order. So it's really just more expansive. It requires government contractors to enforce equal opportunity programs, and it adds this really specific clause that is about prohibiting action taken against people on the basis of race, national origin, color, sex, anything like that. So before they were enforcing employers, contractors, things, people like that to, take affirmative action, but now they're actually saying that people cannot treat someone differently on this basis, and we haven't really seen something like this before. And I think that based off of the research that I did, for a lot of contractors this was something that they tried to get around, right? So they would enforce affirmative action and comply with the federal policy, but in doing so they would also take action against these people, these groups. And for the first time we're seeing that it's being prohibited to take action against these groups of people. Since then, since 1965, from 1978 until 2016, we've seen a couple of Supreme Court cases that have worked to continue to enforce affirmative action. There's the Bakke case in 1978, right? The Bakke case in 1978, in which the Supreme Court reinforces the idea that racial quotas are unconstitutional, but universities can consider race in the admissions process as long as it's a part of a holistic review. So this is the first time that we're seeing it in an educational context. Before, we've only seen it in employment opportunities and federal contractors. Now we see it with education, and I think that's really important. It applies to us specifically. So yes, that's the Bakke case. There's also the Grutter and Gratz cases in 2003, which just was a continuation of upholding affirmative action in university admissions. Again, race being a factor in that holistic process. And then the Fisher versus Texas versus the University of Texas in 2013 and 2016. Universities must demonstrate that there are race neutral alternatives before implementing race conscious policies. What this means is that, yes, it's almost like race neutral, kind of think of this term, I at least consider it to be almost like color blindness, which is not like exactly color blindness. Like, it definitely has more of a positive view, but I do think that the race conscious policies were more important to include in this specific case than those race neutral alternatives, because we really don't want to be blind to anyone's color. We don't want to use that as a way to kind of get around these affirmative action policies. I think that by being more race conscious, we can observe cultural and linguistic and just differences that people have ethnically, and respect those instead of pretending that we don't see them. So that's what Fisher versus the University of Texas was about. Now I'm just going to talk a little bit about the importance of affirmative action, specifically within the field of speech language pathology. So it's important for a lot of reasons. These are not all of them. I'm just trying to give you like the big five that I think are important for us to consider as budding speech language pathologists. Underrepresentation is a big one. We have a lot of racial and ethnic minorities within the field, also within those who are studying to become speech language pathologists. There are actual disparities within healthcare, just aside from, us as clinicians, just within our patient population. There are disparities between the kind of access and therapy that people of different backgrounds can receive. And there's also just, healthcare and things like that also pose an obstacle to the people receiving adequate healthcare outcomes. We also just want to be in support of this legal framework here, be in support of the Civil Rights Act. And I think that showing that we are aligned with affirmative action shows that this is a field that cares about people and who want the best for people of color. And I think that we have the opportunity by aligning ourselves with affirmative action to show that we are in support of that legal framework. Again, also educational inequalities. We all kind of have experienced that. There's less access to education and achievement. And again, going back to those diverse patient populations, we want to be able to have culturally competent care to patients of diverse linguistic and ethnic backgrounds. So just to give you an idea of the underrepresentation that I was speaking about before, this is a donut chart showing the breakdown of demographics among ASHA certified SLPs. So, I mean, I don't think that this is much of a surprise to anyone. We're all very familiar, but yes, the field is 92% white, 4% Black, 3% Asian, and 1% multiracial. And the ASHA website, the ASHA diagram that I got this from also noted that fewer than 1% of SLPs identify as American Indian or Alaska Native or Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islanders. So we really see how important affirmative action is to our field with, something as staggering as this. Now we're gonna talk about some of the myths and misconceptions surrounding affirmative action and compare them and just say like how they're blatantly just not true. We'll also talk about some of the benefits. So myth one is that affirmative action enforces quotas based on race. So we already spoke about earlier how in the case of Bakke 1978, that where the Supreme Court reinforced the idea that strict quotas are unconstitutional. So affirmative action does not have anything to do with race, with quotas based on race. It typically involves considering a large range of factors, and race is just one of those. So it's a very holistic admissions process or hiring process if this is about an employment opportunity. Race is just one side of that, one part of that holistic view. Myth two is that minority individuals admitted or hired through affirmative action are less qualified. And this is simply not the case. I know that there's a lot of stigma surrounding people of color having, just being viewed as not having the same skills and background as people who are not of color. Affirmative action does not lower academic or professional standards. Individuals admitted or hired through affirmative action programs still meet the institution's or employer's qualifications. There's nothing, we're not ignoring people who have certain qualifications just because they're not of color. That's absolutely not what's happening here. This is really just about elevating those who have not had the resources or the foundation that others may have had access to because they come from a different background. Myth three is that affirmative action is no longer needed because discrimination is a thing of the past. Again, discrimination is not a thing of the past. Discrimination and disparity still exist in many areas, specifically in education and employment. And we saw the graph, like this applies to all of us. There's definitely no way that discrimination and disparities do not exist when 92% of this field is white. The educational and achievement gap continue to persist in low income and disadvantaged communities. And this means that students who attend these public schools in these communities have less staff support in those schools. They have less resources to support students in those schools. Whereas, maybe that's a school in Flushing or in the Bronx, and maybe a school that's in the Upper West Side or the Upper East Side probably have lots of resources, well-paid staff who want to put in the time and effort outside of, what's immediately demanded of them in order to support these students and their achievements. And myth four, this is our last myth, is that affirmative action is solely about race. So affirmative action policies do consider race, but that it doesn't stop there. Affirmative action is about supporting all people of minorities, and race is just one aspect where people may be a minority. So affirmative action supports socioeconomic status, gender and disability, and race and ethnicity. And this is only to address various dimensions, various aspects where we might see people suffering from some kind of discrimination or disadvantage. And this is just a quote that I found directly from the DOE here in New York City. The equal educational opportunities in accordance with applicable laws and regulations and without regard to actual or perceived color, race, religion, age, creed, ethnicity, national origin, alienage, citizenship status, disability, sexual orientation, gender, pregnancy, conditions related to pregnancy, or weight. So there's just so many different parts um, within the actual policy of affirmative action. And again, this is within, the educational context, not the employment context, but still, it goes way beyond race. And this is not, this is not like to fix racial issues. This is just a means of elevating those who have experienced or suffered because of these disadvantages, aligned with the policy that affirmative action hopes to fix. Absolutely. So now we're going to talk about the recent SCOTUS ruling, what they decided, and what the implications of this ruling are. So on June 27, 2023, so very recently, the Supreme Court of the United States overruled affirmative action. So affirmative action was banned, right? Here's just a little bit of a breakdown of what actually happened. So while Trump was president, during his administration, he made a really big effort to elect a Supreme Court Board of Justices who were a conservative majority. And this conservative majority declared that race can no longer be a factor in the admissions processes of higher institutions. There's a belief or sentiment among most of these justices that universities have concluded wrongly that the touchstone of an individual's identity is not challenges or skills-based or lessons learned, but, the color of their skin. Before I get more into my opinions and what the general implications and takeaways of what this ruling means, I want to add that this is very reminiscent of the ruling by the same board or by the same justices who overruled Roe versus Wade last year. So I would like to say that it's a little bit of a pattern here with this new conservative majority. Here is a little quote that I found Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, I hope I said her name correctly, said regarding the overturning of affirmative action. This is a direct quote from her. She said, "With Let Them Eat Cake obliviousness today, the majority pulls the ripcord and announces colorblindness for all by legal fiat, but deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it so in life." And I think that she really sums it up very well here. Again, Justice Brown Jackson, she voted against the overturning of affirmative action, and she's also the first Black female justice in the Supreme Court system, the Supreme Court justice system. And basically here, what she's saying is that they're just trying to say that color blindness is what's going to work best for all of us. And this is simply not the case. We know that just because they're saying that race is not illegal or a law-related issue does not mean that it's not a part of the fabric of our everyday lives. So here are just some of the implications of the banning of affirmative action. These are just 4. There's countless. I found a lot, but just boiled it down. There is decreased diversity in highly competitive institutions. So affirmative action policies that would have made students from various racial backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, and different socioeconomic statuses. All of these students who were once made more visible by affirmative action, these they are no longer getting the same kind of exposure in uh, in these highly competitive institutions. Students who have increased responsibilities at home. So again, that's very familiar to us who have different racial backgrounds, who maybe come from disadvantaged communities and low socioeconomic neighborhoods. We have, at least I personally have, responsibility to my family. And I feel a lot of people can resonate with that. And because of that, affirmative action really helps to support students who maybe don't have time for extracurriculars, or who just simply live in circumstances where resources like extracurriculars are not, available to them. And with the ban of affirmative action, these students also get less exposure. There's obviously a negative impact on a student's ability to have equal footing with someone. So again, going back to resources in schools, staffing, things like that, students who were once made more visible and had the students who were once made more visible by affirmative action and kind of put on the same playing field as a student who may have not had those obstacles have lost that step up. Another thing that I know they didn't really speak about too much, but I thought that it was important to include, is that some students who may have wanted to discuss their racial background and maybe experiences that they've had because of that may not speak about that in their personal statements, supplementals, essays, things like that, out of fear that speaking about their race will hurt their chances of getting accepted to these programs. So now just looking to the future and some strategies that can be enforced to help support us in a post affirmative action ban world. So here are some strategies for diversity. One is definitely awareness. I think that institutions can help overcome the ban by evaluating academic achievement within context. What does this mean? Again, it means seeing those students who come from schools that have had less resources, that have had less staffing, looking at them with a perspective that there are obstacles that may have prevented them from getting to the same level as another student who has not had those obstacles. Another one is inclusivity. So again, giving it credit to students who attended underserved and underrepresented schools, having a more holistic understanding of their applications, whether they come from a low socioeconomic status or what their English learner status is. Maybe they are new to the country, and these are things that universities and other institutions can make themselves aware of when considering someone for admissions or even hiring. I know we're not talking about labor, but in that aspect, I think it applies as well. And also just expanding, since they don't have the policy to kind of bolster up this kind of visibility for these students, just focusing on outreach and recruitment in these disadvantaged communities, getting helping these students gain some exposure with these academic institutions. That is what I have for everyone today regarding affirmative action. Just some resources at the end of the slides here in case anyone is interested in looking at the same articles and information that I looked at when making the presentation. So I'm going to stop the recording on the Zoom.